A tremendous success, a tremendous victory. That is how President Trump is celebrating today's Supreme Court ruling on his travel ban. So what does the ruling mean, and where do we go from here? The panel tonight: Caitlin Huey-Burns, national political reporter for Real Clear Politics; CNN legal analyst Paul Callan; Charles Blow is a CNN political commentator; and New York Times opinion columnist Nan Hayworth is a Republican and former Republican Congresswoman. Great to have you all here. Paul Callan, what is the biggest takeaway that you take from the Supreme Court today?
My takeaway is that, the opposition to the court's ruling today, and I happen to think it was a correct ruling by the majority, they're fighting the battle of travel ban number one. And there were a lot of legitimate criticisms about travel ban number one. But this thing has been rewritten 3 times. And I think the new version, as outlined by Justice Roberts in the decision, carefully delineates that they're not trying to discriminate against the Muslim religion, but they're trying to narrow down people who might be a threat to the United States for extra vetting. And some of those people come from Muslim countries, but Venezuela and even North Korea was on the list as well. So I think that as rewritten, the order is constitutional, and I happen to agree with the court's ruling.
It's still, after everything that was said, though, from the president, I mean, this was like an internal dialogue that went on for 2+ years on the president, and where it started and where it ended up. I mean, every Democrat I spoke with was blown away that all of his remarks are now set aside. What's your reaction to it today?
Well, I think it's interesting that the court is basically saying the intention does not matter, right? Because the intention is absolutely clear. It is indisputable. He said it multiple times that his intention was to ban Muslims from coming to the United States. He said that. I'm not making it up. That is not analysis. That is not my interpretation of what he said. Those are the words that he said. The court is basically saying it does not matter what he said. We're going to look at the letter of the law separate from his intention in doing whatever he did. And no matter how many iterations we've gone through and them trying to make it feel less like what he wanted it to be, we're going to look at that and not the intention. That's an extraordinary thing. And it is not divorced from American history. The court has often accepted and facilitated discrimination in America. That's just the truth. That is the history of America. Whether that be slavery, whether that be Japanese internment camps, whether that be Plessy v. Ferguson, the court has done this. This is our American court. It has done this thing. And they're doing this thing again. And so that is where we are.
Nan, why are you shaking your head?
Well, I think on a practical basis, Kate, in addition to which the court actually overturned Korematsu today in its opinion, by the way, repudiated Korematsu, the Japanese-American internment decision. But this was a decision based, I agree with Paul, not on race, not on religion, but on risks to national security. This ban excludes 45 other Muslim-majority nations across the world. It's impossible to argue. It includes 2 non-Muslim majority nations. It is impossible to argue. In fact, that's what the court said.
Different, though, than the limits
but what the court said, but what the court said was that this ban is relevant to national security, has to do entirely with the fact that we cannot trust these nations, the nations on that list, the 7 nations, to vet properly, to assist. They don't have government systems that either will work with us or are organized enough to protect national security. That is solely what this is about.
Keith Ellison said to me, this is putting lipstick on a pig. Senator Hirono says that what the Supreme Court is saying, a Democratic senator said, the Supreme Court essentially saying today is that, Mr. President, you can do whatever the hell you want. Is this over?
Well, what's interesting is Paul laid out very eloquently the parameters of this discussion, but the president is not going to talk about it in those terms. He is declaring this as a victory. And my question is, no matter what this decision was, what does it actually prompt the president to do or empower him or make him feel empowered to do? This is a president who loves executive order, and we have a Congress, as we all know, that has been in gridlock for several years, but even more so now, and particularly on issues that are as complex as immigration.
And
so
you bring up
what does this prompt him to do?
Does this limit him or give him room to run if the president would now say, I want to add nations to this list?
Well, the court lays out in its analysis how a proper way to draft legislation like this, where you have to create categories of risk that aren't necessarily related to religion or nationality. And they say essentially that the new one, the number 3 one, fulfills that. So I think as long as the president follows that formula, he's not going to have a problem. And just hearkening back to what Charles said, I agree with you completely about the inappropriateness, the craziness of the things Trump has said during his campaign and during his presidency. But the court was focused on the presidency as an institution, not as an individual. And frankly, what are we going to do? Just open our borders completely because Donald Trump's president? There have to be restrictions.
But let me say this, all right? So you get a bunch of smart lawyers, and we'll find a way to craft legislation that does not specifically say anything about religion, and you can still get to where you want to be. I think the bigger danger here is not even in the legal arena. It is in the public arena. Because the public did not follow version 1, 2, and 3, everything.
No, not even close.
What they did here, however, was the person who became the President of the United States says, I want this particular group of people not to be here. That was an explicitly discriminatory thing for him to say. And he is going to sell it, it's already, this is my victory. On the things that I promised, right? He's not
even though he trashed it for being watered down.
And so and I think the signal that sends to the public, not the people who are following the letter of the law, it's the public, is that the court has basically rubber stamped that. Now, whether or not that's true or not, but I'm just saying,
what is your solution to national security issues?
No, listen,
you can't just open the borders
up. What do you say about 45 Muslim-majority nations that are not included in the ban?
Oh my God. So if I don't discriminate against everybody who's part of a race, then, sorry, do you ask me a question, do you want an answer, or do you want to keep talking? Because I know you love the way you sound. That's not what I'm saying.
Now you're projecting.
No, baby. I think you do. So what I'm saying to you is, if you ask me a question, I'll answer it. Just because I don't discriminate against everybody that is part of a race, gender, ethnicity, that doesn't mean that I am not discriminating.
Explain that.
Right. So
this is the beauty.
This is the beauty of racism, and I've always loved this. They always make the exception, right? It's not really you. It's them. It's the other ones, right? It's always the ability to make the exception is what makes racism work so well. Because it's not logical, so you can't really universally apply it, right? So the idea that somebody could have an exception does not shock me at all when it comes to racism. At all. It does not surprise.
Okay. Charles, you are never going to view anything except through that prism.
I do want to ask you that. No, I want you to answer this.
I'm going to be looking out of these eyes. That's true.
I understand, and I respect your prism, but it's your prism.
Yes, it is.
I want you to answer this. Jeff Flake, though, not from the South and not a Democrat. He's a Republican from Arizona. He says the ban could make this country less safe because it could be interpreted as U.S. versus Islam rather than West versus terrorism.
But on its face, it cannot be interpreted that way.
And that's
it is very obvious that majority Muslim nations, including the largest ones in the world, have no such ban.
Okay.
The Supreme Court
also, if we're talking about where terrorists have come from, not from these countries. That's my thought.
Well, the Obama administration
coming up, fresh off his travel ban, President Trump makes a push for more border wall funding and push for a new policy at the border, which is, in his words, you can't come in. The panel weighs in on that next.